A peaceful town is disrupted by a gang of bikers terrorizing and oppressing the locals, ready to use violence to impose their will. What seemed like an easy conquest quickly turns into their worst nightmare when they encounter a strong woman, a former Special Forces operative with exceptional combat skills and leadership. With her guidance, the town unites to rise up against the cruel bikers. Who will triumph in this battle? Join us as we follow this gripping story. The sun dipped low over the Wyoming horizon, painting the rolling hills and weathered fences of Cedar Creek in hues of gold and amber. It was a picturesque small town nestled between jagged cliffs and sprawling fields, a place that seemed untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But beneath its tranquil surface, cracks were beginning to form, and no one understood this better than Raven Ray Carter. Ray wiped the sweat from her brow as she leaned against the porch railing of her modest farmhouse. Her sharp eyes scanned the landscape with a vigilance that betrayed her past. Once a decorated sniper in Delta Force, she had traded the chaos of war zones for the quiet life of a farmer. But even now, years after leaving the battlefield, her instincts refused to dull. Inside the house, her teenage son, Malik, argued with his grandmother, Loretta, about dinner. Loretta, despite the early stages of Alzheimer's, still managed to run the kitchen with the precision of a general. She was a formidable woman, having raised Ray on her own while working double shifts at a factory. Now her body had slowed, but her mind, though fleeting at times, remained as sharp as ever. "Ray, come on in," Loretta called, her voice firm but warm. "Food's ready, and I'm not going to wait all night for you to come eat." Ray allowed herself a rare smile, stepping inside. Malik sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. His lanky frame was slouched in a way that only teenagers could master. "Put it down, Malik," Ray said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Dinner's family time." He grumbled but complied, setting the phone aside. "It's just some news about that biker gang," he said casually. "Iron Vultures. They're all over the local forums." Ray stiffened. "What about them?" "Some people in town are saying they've been seen around here. Couple of farms got hit up north. Weird stuff, barns burned, livestock gone." Loretta frowned. "They've been creeping closer for weeks. I told the ladies at the church we should be keeping an eye out, but no one listens to old Loretta." Ray's gaze darkened. She had heard whispers about the Iron Vultures before. A notorious motorcycle gang, they were known for running extortion rackets in small towns, targeting vulnerable communities and squeezing them dry. She had hoped Cedar Creek would be too remote for their interest, but Malak's words confirmed her fears. The next morning, Ray rose with the sun, as she always did. Her days started early, tending to the animals and checking the fences that separated her land from the wild expanse beyond. Malik had already left for school, his bike kicking up a trail of dust on the gravel road. Loretta was sitting on the porch with her coffee, humming an old gospel tune. Ray was halfway through checking the eastern fence line when she spotted a plume of dust on the main road. A black motorcycle roared toward the farm, its rider dressed in worn leather with the distinctive insignia of the Iron Vultures emblazoned on his back. Ray's breath hitched as she crouched instinctively, watching the bike slow to a crawl near her property line. The rider didn't approach further. He just sat there, his face obscured by a tinted visor, scanning the property. After what felt like an eternity, he revved the engine and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Ray's jaw tightened. This wasn't a random biker passing through. It was reconnaissance, plain and simple. The Iron Vultures were testing the waters. That evening, Ray's suspicions were confirmed when Cody Hansen, the local mechanic, stopped by. His prosthetic leg clicked against the wooden porch as he climbed the steps, his face lined with concern. "Ray," he said, tipping his cap, "you heard about the Thompson place." "What about it?" Ray asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Burned to the ground last night. Cattle stolen. Old man Thompson said a couple of bikers showed up earlier in the week, asking about his bank situation. Told him he needed protection. When he refused, Cody trailed off, shaking his head." Ray felt a knot form in her stomach. The Iron Vultures weren't just passing through, they were laying the groundwork for a full-scale operation. She glanced at Malak, who stood in the doorway, his face pale. "We need to act," Ray said firmly. "If they think they can roll through Cedar Creek like this, they're in for a surprise." Ray spent the next few days quietly preparing. She didn't want to alarm the townsfolk, many of whom were already nervous about the rumors circulating in the local diner. Instead, she focused on reinforcing her own property. The fence posts were replaced, the barn fortified, and old hunting traps dusted off and hidden in strategic locations. In the evenings, she spoke with Loretta and Malik about what might happen. Malik, despite his youthful bravado, couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. Loretta, however, seemed unshaken. "I've lived through worse," she said. "And we'll get through this too." But Ray knew the stakes were higher than they appeared. The Iron Vultures weren't ordinary thugs. Their operations were calculated, their intimidation systematic. She'd seen groups like them overseas, in places where the rule of law had crumbled. They didn't just want money, they wanted control. The Iron Vultures made their first real move 3 days later. Malak was coming home from school when he noticed 3 bikes parked outside the Cedar Creek diner. He paused at the corner, watching as the bikers leaned against their machines, talking loudly and laughing. Their presence was enough to silence the usual chatter inside the diner, and Malik's gut told him to stay out of sight. When he got home, his face was flushed. "Mom," he said, rushing inside. "They're in town. 3 of them. They were at the diner, asking about the farms around here." Ray's heart sank. The time for subtlety was over. That night, she retrieved the case she had hidden in the attic since her retirement. Inside was her old sniper rifle, an M40A5, meticulously maintained despite years of disuse. Alongside it were tactical gear and enough ammunition to defend a small army. Ray sat at the kitchen table, cleaning the rifle with the same precision she once used in the field. Malik watched silently, a mix of fear and admiration in his eyes. "Are we in danger?" he asked quietly. Ray looked up, her expression steely. "Not if I can help it." The morning after Malik's unsettling report, Cedar Creek felt different. The usual hum of tractors, the soft bark of dogs, and the casual conversations at the general store seemed subdued. Word of the Iron Vulture's presence had spread quickly. Ray could feel the tension in the air, an unspoken fear gripping the small town. People didn't want to believe what was happening, but the reality was staring them in the face. Ray stood in the middle of her field, the rising sun painting her surroundings in warm hues. Her rifle lay on the table in the barn, cleaned and ready. Malik was out back, helping Loretta with the chickens, while Ray reviewed her plans. She'd spent half the night mapping the town's weak points, considering how the vultures might move if they decided to escalate. Her train of thought was interrupted by the low rumble of motorcycles. Her head snapped up, her body tensing as 3 bikes emerged over the hill. They weren't speeding or making a scene. Instead, they moved slowly, deliberately, the riders scanning her property with calculating eyes. Ray walked to the gate, wiping her hands on her jeans to appear calm. The bikers stopped just short of her driveway, their engines idling. The leader, a wiry man with a scar running down the side of his face, lifted his visor and grinned. "Nice place you got here," he called out, his voice carrying over the hum of engines. "Bet it's worth a lot." Ray folded her arms, her stance casual but ready. "Can I help you?" The man tilted his head, still smiling. "We're just out for a ride, seeing the sights. Figured we'd stop by and introduce ourselves. Name's Chet. My friends and I were with the Iron Vultures. Heard a lot about Cedar Creek, nice town." "Not nice enough for tourists," Ray replied evenly. "If you've seen what you came to see, you can move along." Chet chuckled, dismounting his bike. His companion stayed seated, watching her closely. "I like her," he said to his friends, then turned back to Ray. "Look, I'm just being neighborly. Times are tough, and a lot of farms around here seem to be struggling. We like to help folks out, make sure nothing bad happens to their land. Fires, broken fences, missing cattle, you get the idea." Ray's jaw tightened, but her face remained neutral. "We're doing fine, thanks." "Everyone says that," Chet replied, stepping closer. "But the truth is, things can change real quick. A little investment in protection can go a long way. $500 a month isn't much for peace of mind." Ray took a step forward, meeting his gaze. "We don't need your kind of peace." The smile vanished from Chet's face. He stared at her for a long moment, then backed up slowly. "Suit yourself," he said, climbing onto his bike. "But don't say we didn't warn you." As the bikers roared away, Ray stood at the gate, watching until they disappeared over the hill. She knew this wasn't over, it was only the beginning. Later that evening, Ray made her way to the Cedar Creek Community Center. The small building, once used for church socials and bingo nights, was packed with residents. The air buzzed with nervous energy as people discussed the Iron Vultures and their brazen threats. Cody Hansen stood near the front, leaning on his prosthetic leg, trying to calm the crowd. "We can't panic," he said. "That's exactly what they want. If we show weakness, they'll think they can walk all over us." "Panic?" shouted a wiry farmer named Joe. "They already burned down the Thompson place. How long before it's my farm? Or yours?" Maria Torres, the town's veterinarian, raised her voice. "What are we supposed to do? Call the sheriff. Benji's a good man, but he doesn't have the manpower to take on a gang like this." Sheriff Benji Tucker, seated near the back, sighed heavily. "She's not wrong. We've got 2 deputies, and neither of them is trained for this kind of thing. The county won't send backup unless there's bloodshed, and by then it'll be too late." The room fell into uneasy silence, the weight of the situation sinking in. Ray, who had been standing quietly in the back, stepped forward. "We can't wait for the county," she said, her voice steady but firm. "If we want to protect this town, we have to do it ourselves." All eyes turned to her. Cody raised an eyebrow. "And how do you suggest we do that, Ray?" Ray looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of people she'd known for years. "We prepare. We fortify our properties, we organize watch groups, and we train." "Train?" Joe scoffed. "We're farmers, not soldiers." "So we're half the people I trained overseas," Ray replied, her tone sharp. "You don't need a uniform to learn how to defend yourself. What you need is the will to fight for what's yours." Maria crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "And who's going to teach us? You?" "Yes," Ray said simply. "I've got the experience and I'm willing to share it. But I can't do it alone. We need to come together. That's the only way we stand a chance." Over the next few days, Ray worked tirelessly to prepare the town. She started by organizing small groups, teaching them basic self-defense and tactical awareness. Malak took charge of the younger kids, showing them how to set up simple alarm systems using cans and string. Loretta, despite her condition, rallied the older residents, organizing supply runs and preparing emergency shelters. Cody used his mechanical expertise to reinforce vehicles, turning old pickup trucks into makeshift barricades. Maria set up a first aid station in her veterinary clinic, stocking it with supplies for both humans and animals. Ray's military training came to life as she transformed Cedar Creek into a community ready to defend itself. She taught the townspeople how to create choke points along the roads, how to use hunting rifles effectively, and how to move silently at night. Her instructions were clear and concise, but she always emphasized one thing above all: we don't go looking for a fight. But if it comes to us, we make damn sure we're ready. The Iron Vultures returned under cover of darkness. Ray had anticipated this, stationing Cody and 2 other volunteers on the outskirts of town. Malik, armed with a walkie-talkie, stayed in the attic of the farmhouse, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. When the low rumble of motorcycles echoed through the valley, Ray was already moving. She positioned herself near the town square, her rifle trained on the main road. The plan was simple: hold the line and make it clear that Cedar Creek wouldn't be intimidated. The bikers rolled into town, their headlights cutting through the darkness. This time, there were more of them, 10 riders, led by Chet. They stopped in the center of the square, revving their engines, the noise a deliberate show of force. Ray stepped out from the shadows, her rifle slung across her shoulder. "That's far enough," she called. Chet dismounted, his grin even more menacing than before. "You really think you can stop us? This isn't your war, soldier." "This isn't war," Ray replied. "It's home. And you're not welcome here." The standoff was tense, the silence broken only by the low growl of the bikes. Then, one of the riders reached for a weapon. Ray moved faster than anyone could react. Her rifle barked once, the shot hitting the ground inches from the man's hand. The message was clear: she could have hit him if she wanted to. "Next one won't miss," she said coldly. The bikers hesitated, clearly unsure of their next move. Chet glared at Ray, his bravado faltering for the first time. Finally, he signaled to his men. "Let's go." For now. As they retreated into the night, Ray lowered her rifle, her body tense with adrenaline. She knew this was just the beginning. The days following the Iron Vulture's retreat were anything but peaceful. Cedar Creek felt like a powder keg, ready to ignite at any moment. Everyone knew the gang wouldn't leave things unresolved. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, but there was a newfound determination among the townsfolk, sparked by Ray's leadership and the successful defense. Ray sat on her porch early one morning, nursing a cup of coffee, as the sun began its slow climb over the horizon. Malak joined her, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He sat quietly, the weight of recent events hanging between them. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked finally. Ray didn't answer immediately. She took a sip of her coffee, watching the field swaying gently in the breeze. "Not think, Malik. No. And when they do, they won't just be testing us like before." "Then why are you so calm?" he pressed. Ray glanced at her son, her expression softening. "I'm not calm. I'm prepared. There's a difference." By mid-morning, the town square was buzzing. Cody had set up a workshop in the parking lot outside his garage, reinforcing vehicle doors with scrap metal. Maria was running first aid drills at the community center, teaching residents how to respond to injuries. It was in this moment of tense preparation that the Iron Vultures made their next move. A single motorcycle approached the square at a slow, deliberate pace, its engine cutting through the hum of activity. The rider was a younger man, wearing the gang's signature leather vest, but his demeanor was cautious, almost nervous. Ray stepped into the square, flanked by Cody and Maria. The rider stopped, killed the engine, and dismounted. He carried a plain white envelope, which he handed to Ray without a word. "What's this?" she asked, her tone sharp. "A message," the rider muttered, avoiding her gaze. "From Chet. He says this is your last chance to talk before things get ugly." Ray tore open the envelope, pulling out a single piece of paper. The message was short and scrawled in an even hand. "This doesn't have to end badly. Meet me tomorrow at the old quarry noon. Come alone." Maria peered over Ray's shoulder, frowning. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Cody said, crossing his arms. "But that doesn't mean we ignore it." Ray folded the note and slid it into her pocket. "I'll go." "No way," Malik said, stepping forward. "You're not walking into this alone." "I'll be fine," Ray replied firmly. "This isn't just about me. It's about showing them that Cedar Creek isn't afraid." The next day, Ray arrived at the old quarry, an abandoned site that had been dormant for decades. The rocky terrain and steep drop-offs made it an ideal location for an ambush, and Ray knew better than to trust the gang's intentions. She arrived on foot, leaving her truck hidden down the road. Her rifle was slung over her shoulder, her sidearm holstered at her hip. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, casting long shadows across the jagged rocks. Chet was already there, leaning against his motorcycle with a smirk. Behind him stood 3 of his men, all armed and watching Ray closely. Right on time, Chet called out, his voice echoing off the quarry walls. "I like that. Shows respect." "Get to the point," Ray said, stopping a safe distance away. Chet's smirk widened. "You're not like the rest of these people, are you? They're scared little rabbits, but you've got some bite. I can respect that." "I didn't come here for compliments," Ray replied. "Say what you need to say." "All right, straight to business," Chet said, spreading his arms. "We're not unreasonable people, Ray. Cedar Creek's a nice place, but it's just another town. You've made your point, you can fight back. But how long do you think you can hold out? We've got numbers, connections. You're just one woman." "Then why haven't you already taken the town?" Ray asked, her voice steady. Chet's grin faltered for a moment. "Because we're not monsters. We give people a choice. Pay us, and we leave you alone. Everyone wins." "And if we don't pay?" Ray pressed. Chet's expression darkened. "Then we make an example of Cedar Creek. Burn it to the ground so every other town knows what happens when you cross us." Ray didn't flinch. "If you try, you won't leave this valley alive." The tension in the air was palpable. Chet's men shifted uneasily, clearly unsettled by Ray's confidence. Chet, however, just chuckled and shook his head. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you. Ray held his gaze for a long moment before turning and walking away. She could feel their eyes on her back, but she didn't give them the satisfaction of looking back. When Ray returned to Cedar Creek, the mood was grim. She gathered the town's leaders at the community center to share what she'd learned. They're planning a full assault, she said, her voice calm but urgent. They want to make an example of us. Cody slammed his hand on the table. Then we make an example of them first. Maria shook her head. We don't have the numbers or the firepower for that. No, but we have the home field advantage, Ray said. We know this town. We know the terrain. If they come for us, we'll make sure they regret it. Over the next few days, the entire town mobilized. Ray led tactical drills, teaching residents how to hold defensive positions and coordinate their efforts. Cody reinforced key buildings, turning them into makeshift fortresses. Maria stockpiled medical supplies, preparing for the worst. Even Malak got involved, working with a group of teenagers to set up surveillance points and alarm systems throughout the town. His determination impressed Ray, though it also filled her with a deep sense of unease. She didn't want him to grow up like this, forced to fight for survival. On the eve of the expected attack, the town gathered at the church. The pews were filled with farmers, mechanics, shopkeepers, ordinary people who had become soldiers out of necessity. Loretta stood at the front, her voice strong as she led them in a hymn. It was a moment of unity, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Afterward, Ray pulled Malek aside. Stay close to Loretta tomorrow, she said. Your job is to keep her safe. Malek frowned. I can do more than that. I know you can, Ray said, placing a hand on his shoulder. But this isn't your fight. Not yet. In the early hours of the morning, as a heavy fog rolled in, Ray stood on the roof of the community center, her rifle at the ready. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. Then, faintly, she heard the low growl of engines. They were coming. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The battle for Cedar Creek was about to begin. The growl of engines grew louder, echoing through the valley like a gathering storm. From her vantage point on the roof of the community center, Ray Carter scanned the fog-shrouded road through the scope of her rifle. The iron vultures were coming in force, their lights piercing the dense morning mist. Behind her, Cody Hansen climbed the ladder to join her, his prosthetic leg clicking with each step. He carried a scoped rifle slung across his back and a set of binoculars around his neck. They're making a lot of noise for a surprise attack, Cody muttered. They're not trying to surprise us, Ray replied, her voice calm and steady. They want us to know they're coming. Fear is their first weapon. Too bad we're not scared, Cody said with a tight smile, setting up his rifle on the edge of the roof. Ray didn't respond, but her eyes remained locked on the road as she counted the headlights cutting through the mist. The iron vultures rolled into town in 2 columns, their motorcycles flanked by pickup trucks outfitted with mounted spotlights and reinforced steel grates. At least 20 vehicles. Ray could see Chet at the head of the pack, his scarred face lit by the orange glow of a cigarette. The gang came to a halt at the edge of the town square. Chet dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel as he surveyed the seemingly empty streets. His men spread out, their voices carrying through the still air. Looks quiet, one of them muttered. Too quiet. Chet smirked, tossing his cigarette to the ground. They're here. I can feel it. Spread out. Flush them out. Ray watched as the gang fanned out, their movements disciplined and tactical, far more organized than the thugs she'd encountered before. These weren't amateurs, they were ready for a fight. But so was Cedar Creek. Ray keyed her radio, her voice calm but firm. Team Alpha, hold position. Let them come to us. Around town, small teams of residents waited in silence, hidden in fortified positions. Cody had transformed old delivery trucks into mobile barricades, while Maria's group had prepared makeshift trenches along the main roads. Malik and his teenage crew manned the lookout points, armed with slingshots, rocks, and homemade alarms. The first shots came from the iron vultures. A burst of gunfire shattered the window of the hardware store, and one of the gang's trucks rammed into the side of the diner, collapsing part of the wall. Ray waited, her finger hovering over the trigger. Not yet, she murmured to herself. Let them commit. The vultures continued their assault, smashing windows, kicking down doors, and firing randomly into buildings. But as they moved deeper into the town, they found themselves funneled into narrow streets and alleys just as Ray had planned. "Now," Ray said into the radio. Cody fired the first shot, his rifle cracking through the morning air. The round hit a biker's rear tire, sending the man sprawling. Across the square, other defenders opened fire, targeting vehicles and scattering the gang's formation. Chaos erupted. The iron vultures scrambled for cover, their bravado evaporating as they realized they were surrounded. Ray picked her targets carefully, firing at fuel tanks and engine blocks to disable their vehicles. Down on the ground, Malak's team triggered their first trap, a line of cans filled with nails and scrap metal rigged to a tripwire. The resulting explosion sent shards flying, stopping a group of bikers in their tracks. Malik signaled his team to fall back to their next position, grinning despite himself. On the east side of town, Maria and her group of volunteers held the line with shotguns and hunting rifles. When one of the gang's trucks tried to break through, Cody appeared with a jury-rigged flamethrower, blasting flames at the vehicle's tires. The truck veered off course and crashed into a ditch. "They're scattering," Cody shouted over the radio. "Good," Ray replied. "Keep them disorganized." Despite their initial success, the vultures weren't giving up easily. Chet barked orders through a handheld radio, rallying his men. A group of them regrouped near the church, using it as a makeshift stronghold. From there they began firing on the defenders, pinning several residents down. Ray adjusted her position, her rifle aimed at the church steeple. Through her scope, she saw a sniper setting up a position. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the square, and the sniper crumpled. "Church is clear," Ray said. "Team Bravo, move in." Maria's team advanced, reclaiming the area and forcing the vultures to retreat further into the maze of streets. As the battle raged on, Chet realized his forces were outmatched. He called for reinforcements, but Ray had anticipated this. Malak's surveillance crew had already spotted a second wave of bikers approaching from the west, and they had prepared accordingly. When the reinforcements arrived, they were met with a hail of fire from hidden defenders. Cody's group used a tractor to block the road, cutting off the escape route. Trapped and demoralized, the remaining vultures began to surrender, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. But Chet wasn't ready to give up. He climbed into one of the trucks and roared toward the town square, a Molotov cocktail in hand. Ray tracked him through her scope, her heart pounding as she lined up the shot. "Don't make me do this," she whispered. Chet lit the rag and raised the bottle, but before he could throw it, Ray fired. The bullet shattered the bottle in his hand, igniting the cab of the truck. Chet bailed out, his jacket on fire, rolling on the ground to extinguish the flames. He looked up to find Ray standing over him, her rifle aimed squarely at his chest. "It's over," she said coldly. "Call off your men." Defeated and burned, Chet nodded. He grabbed his radio and croaked, "Stand down. Fall back." As the iron vultures limped out of town, the residents of Cedar Creek emerged from their defensive positions. The square was littered with debris, shattered glass, and the remnants of the gang's vehicles, but the town was still standing. Maria and her medical team tended to the wounded, while Cody's crew began clearing the wreckage. Malik walked over to Ray, his face a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "You did it, Mom," he said. "No," Ray replied, looking around at the people working together to rebuild. "We did it." The battle for Cedar Creek was over, but the scars it left behind were fresh. Buildings were damaged, supplies were depleted, and the townsfolk, though victorious, were still shaken by the intensity of the Iron Vulture's assault. Ray Carter stood in the center of the town square, surveying the aftermath. The smoke from burned-out vehicles still lingered in the air, a grim reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But something deeper troubled Ray. The Iron Vultures had been relentless, more organized and well-equipped than any gang she'd encountered before. Their tactics didn't match the profile of a small-time criminal outfit. Someone else had to be pulling the strings. 3 days later, as Cedar Creek began the slow process of rebuilding, Malak burst into the farmhouse, clutching a laptop. "Mom, you need to see this," he said breathlessly. Ray followed him to the kitchen table, where Malik opened a browser filled with headlines about Black Spire Logistics, a shadowy private security firm with a reputation for questionable ethics. They've been linked to extortion and arms deals all over the state, Malik explained, scrolling through the articles. Look at this. Black Spire was recently awarded a government contract for rural security operations. That's why the vultures had such advanced gear. Ray leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowing. You're telling me a private military company is backing a gang of thugs? Not just backing them, Malik said. They're using the vultures to destabilize rural towns. Once the towns are desperate, Black Spire steps in and offers protection for a price. Ray sat back, her mind racing. It made sense now, the sophistication of the vultures' operations, their persistence, and their access to resources far beyond what a normal gang could afford. Black Spire wasn't just a benefactor, they were orchestrating the entire operation. Ray knew she couldn't handle this alone. That evening she called a meeting at the community center. The room was packed, with townsfolk eager to hear what came next. Cody, Maria, and Sheriff Benji stood near the front, their faces grim. We've won the battle, Ray began, but the war is far from over. The Iron Vultures were just the tip of the spear. The real enemy is Black Spire Logistics, a private security firm using gangs like the vultures to destabilize communities. The room erupted in murmurs. Maria raised a hand to quiet them. So what do? We can't fight a corporation. We can't fight them head on, Ray agreed. But we don't have to. Black Spire thrives on secrecy and control. If we expose what they're doing, we can force their hand. How do we even start? Cody asked. Ray glanced at Malik, who was standing near the back, a determined look on his face. We start with the evidence. Malik, Cody, and Maria worked together to dig deeper into Black Spire's operations. Using hacked documents, insider accounts, and local reports, they uncovered a web of corruption stretching far beyond Cedar Creek. Black Spire had infiltrated banks, local governments, and even state law enforcement, using their influence to silence opposition. Ray and Sheriff Benji coordinated with trusted contacts in neighboring towns, warning them about Black Spire's tactics and rallying support. Communities that had been targeted by the vultures began sharing their stories, creating a broader picture of the corporation's strategy. But as their investigation gained momentum, Ray knew it was only a matter of time before Black Spire retaliated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Loretta sat on the porch, humming an old hymn while shelling peas. Ray was inside, sorting through maps with Cody, when Malik burst into the room. "Mom, it's Scout," he shouted. "He's barking like crazy." Ray grabbed her rifle and headed outside, Malik and Cody close behind. Scout, their loyal shepherd, was at the edge of the property, barking toward the road. In the dim light, Ray could just make out a black SUV parked 100 yards away. The vehicle sat idling, its windows tinted and its presence unmistakably deliberate. "They're watching us," Cody said quietly. Ray raised her rifle and aimed at the SUV's front tire. Before she could pull the trigger, the vehicle reversed and disappeared into the night. "They know we're onto them," Ray muttered, lowering her weapon. "We need to move fast." The next morning, Ray and Maria devised a plan to take the fight to Black Spire. Their goal was to infiltrate a nearby Black Spire facility, a warehouse suspected of storing weapons and surveillance equipment for the Iron Vultures. Maria secured the intel through a contact in a neighboring town, a former journalist named Eric who had been investigating Black Spire for years. He provided the location and a rough layout of the warehouse. "This is risky," Eric warned. "They've got guards, cameras, and a lot of firepower." "We've faced worse," Ray said. "But we'll need to be smart about this." That night, Ray, Cody, and Maria approached the warehouse under the cover of darkness. Malik stayed behind, monitoring the situation via a hacked drone feed. The facility was heavily guarded, with floodlights sweeping the perimeter and armed men patrolling in pairs. Ray led the way, her movements silent and precise, her military training guiding every step. Cody disabled the exterior cameras, while Maria planted a series of small explosives near the loading docks, just enough to create a diversion if needed. Once inside, they navigated the maze of crates and equipment, searching for evidence. They found it in a locked office, files detailing Black Spire's contracts, bank transfers, and operational plans. Among the documents was a chilling revelation: Cedar Creek was only one of dozens of targets. "We need to get this out now," Maria whispered, snapping photos of the documents with her phone. Before they could leave, the alarm system blared to life. The guards had found one of Cody's disabled cameras. "Time to go," Ray said, her voice calm despite the chaos. The team sprinted toward the exit, gunfire echoing through the warehouse. Ray covered their retreat, taking down 2 guards with precise shots. As they reached the loading docks, Maria triggered the explosives, creating a fiery distraction that lit up the night sky. Outside, Cody started the getaway vehicle, a battered old pickup he'd modified for speed. The group piled in, speeding away as more guards poured out of the warehouse. From the back seat, Maria held up her phone. "We've got everything we need." Ray nodded, her eyes on the road ahead. "Now we show the world." Over the next 48 hours, Ray and her team worked tirelessly to compile their evidence into a comprehensive expose. Eric contacted his journalist network, ensuring the story reached major news outlets. When the expose broke, it sent shockwaves through the state. Headlines blared: "Private security firm tied to organized crime." "Black Spire Logistics accused of extortion corruption." "Small-town defenders take on corporate giants." The fallout was immediate. Black Spire faced investigations, lawsuits, and a public relations disaster. Their stock plummeted, and their CEO was forced to resign. With Black Spire on the defensive, Cedar Creek finally had a chance to breathe. The town's victory became a symbol of resistance, inspiring other communities to stand up against corporate corruption. Ray, Malik, and Loretta returned to their farm, the fields once again alive with the sound of life. Malik had grown into a young man Ray could be proud of, his courage and ingenuity shining through in every challenge they'd faced. One evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, Malik turned to his mother. "Do you think it's over?" Ray smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not over. But for now, we've won." Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.